Hi, folks. I met Alison in 2011, the last time she was here at Evergreen speaking to a class of mine. And I was fascinated by her work and process because it challenged me to think about relationships between form, content, and the politics of representation in subtle, complex, and ever-changing ways. The questions of authorship, authenticity, responsibility between artist and subject are constantly on the move in Alison O'Daniel's work, never arriving at something absolute or fixed, just like identity. She doesn't run from the tensions and responsibilities that connect her embodied experience as a white woman, a lip reader, a hearing aid wearer, a person with varying accesses to class privilege, to her creative practices as a filmmaker and object maker. This is a refreshing willingness that's not always evident within the world of contemporary art or cinema. Alison's accomplishments as a working artist are numerous and varied. She holds an MFA from UC Irvine, was a resident at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in 2007. She's recently participated in other residencies at the Wexner Center for the Arts Film and Video Studio Program in Columbus, Ohio, the prestigious Fine Arts Work Center 2012-13 fellowship, received the 2014 Center for Cultural Innovation Investing in Artists grant, and the Rema Hort Mann Foundation grant. Her recent and forthcoming solo exhibitions include, in 2016 at Art in General in New York, and in 2015, All Component Parts in, oh gosh, my French is terrible, Centre d'Art Contemporain in Passerelle, Brest, France. Let's see, oh, and also a solo exhibition in 2013 called Quasi-Closed Captions at Samuel Freeman Gallery in Los Angeles. She currently lives and works in Los Angeles, and we're very, very excited and lucky to have her with us. Thank you, Alison.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Naima, and thank you, Shaw, for organizing this. I'm really happy to be here. It's good to be back at Evergreen. I like Evergreen a lot, so thank you for having me. I'm gonna show a bunch of videos, so I'm actually gonna set a timer so I can keep myself in check, and I might end up skipping a few because I do wanna honor the Q&A at the end, so I'll just jump right in. The title of this talk is Quasi-Closed Captions, which is a term that I'll talk about a little bit later in the talk, and it was the title of my solo show at Samuel Freeman Gallery in Los Angeles a few years ago, and I go back to that phrase often. Primarily, I'm working between sculpture and filmmaking and performance. And I'm really interested in building this whole vocabulary in my work that jumps back and forth and borrows inherent languages between not only the visual, which is usually prioritized, but also the sonic and the aural, and also somatic and haptic experiences. And I'm always attempting to vary levels of access for the audience and also for myself as the maker, and then for all of the participants. I collaborate a lot with many, many different people, and I'm always trying to kind of vary everybody's access to different aspects of sound, color, material in the work. And so just to kind of give a moment of larger explanation, I am hard of hearing. I wear hearing aids in both ears and I lip read, and I started collaborating with deaf composers and artists and performers, as well as hard of hearing. There's a whole spectrum of experiences around hearing, and I became very interested in exploring those spectrums through collaboration. And so through all of those collaborations, I'm really interested in emphasizing these different levels of experience and emphasizing different ways of knowing. And I'll say more about this as I go through the work. I guess one other bit of introduction is that I really am interested in trying to explode storytelling so that it's reliant on and exploring different bodily experiences and steps away from a more sort of normative and traditional script-based structure in cinema. And also I'm interested in flipping the languages so that, like, introducing basically cinematic language into sculpture and sculptural language that's really revolves around the body and space and the awareness of moving through space into the space of cinema. So yeah, I guess I'll move forward and talk about a project that I kind of started this body of work with, or these ideas with, which is a project called Night Sky, and it's the first film that I made. I finished it in 2011, and it's a 75-minute film that also has a performative element. I conceived of and produced the film with a cast and crew that was half hearing and then half deaf and hard of hearing, and all of the different experiences of everybody involved really informed the content, the making of, and then also the reception afterwards. So the actual story of that film is a story of two girls whose names are Cleo and Jay, and they travel through the desert and they come across a portal in the desert, and on the other side of the portal is a dance marathon that's in progress. And the film borrows familiar sort of narrative sci-fi buddy film and road movie tropes, and then all of those get slightly destabilized because of the emphasis on sound as the primary storyteller, and also sound becomes the main character in the film. And so I will play a clip that's about 8 minutes long, and it has I think 5 different segments from the film, so it's jumping through different parts of the film.
We are having a technical glitch, but just keep moving. The contest is still in progress, so you can't stop. Just keep dancing.
Keep your hands on the fence. Tomorrow there will be plenty of water. Dictators will be deposed. The mundane will be extraordinary. Jay, you can feel a subwoofer purr, my bass notes arriving in your palms. And you, Cleo, do you think you were lost? You were mostly right here. There are missing parts floating off in space like debris. But those parts have been gone for a long time. You lost your naturalness a long time ago. Your intuition, your ability to read different breathing patterns is completely disabled.
So with Night Sky, I was really interested in the process of collaboration, kind of determining the script. And so a lot of what you just saw, at least the spoken and the signed dialogue, is I had asked a bunch of writers to sort of write, if a voice on high came to you, like what would be that monologue or whatever that you received. And then I mixed all of those together and then kind of mixed that together with this hippie dog training manual that I had found from the 60s. And all of the dialogue comes from that. And so it's interesting to watch this because I'm really in the midst of a new project, and I've been working with composers in the same way as I worked with writers for this film. And then there's this whole other component of this film, which is this live component where the soundtrack switches into the physical space of the theater. And what I have here is a score that a sign language interpreter made for sign language interpreters to perform a live sign language accompaniment during the screening of the film. And so anytime that the film is screened, it either has live musical accompaniment or a live sign language accompaniment. And so those moments of accompaniment happen at the exact same time every time that it's performed, but they are not analogous. So the sign language interpreter determined her own score, and then the musicians, I always work with local musicians wherever it's screened, and I give them really specific and also very vague instructions, like this part should sound like the desert, and however they interpret that is great. I really want to kind of take this back seat and step away from being the director once the music and once the sign language is presented. So what you're seeing here is this score that any sign language interpreter would be able to come in and read it pretty much the same way that a musician reads a music score. And just to give like a bit of explanation, if you can see that sort of tic-tac-toe shape that's at the top left, what that refers to is the body. And so in sign language, there's inflection is really important, and that's happening. So if I do a sign and I raise it up here, that has a different meaning than if I keep it tight and close to my body. And so, for example, there is one sign that Lisa Reynolds, the sign language interpreter who developed this, does, where she does this. That's open to a lot of interpretation. Somebody could think that that means stars falling. It could also be a very time-based idea where it's like the past moving into the future, because everything that's past tense in sign language is behind the shoulder and everything that's future is in front. And so there's all of this room for this other narrative to kind of come in and add to what I made in Night Sky that's determined by these people who are determining either the aural component or the spatial visual component. So I finished this film in 2011. I premiered it at the Anthology Film Archive as part of Performa. And I got home and I had just finished being in the space of making this project where I was in a lot of dialogue with people who had really different relationships to sound. And as soon as I got home back to Los Angeles, I heard this news story on the radio about 3 days after I got home about these tubas that had been stolen from a high school. And just my ears perked up, and I thought it was kind of an interesting, wild story. And then I heard another story about 4 days later, and then there was another one. And so there was this rash of tuba thefts that were happening from middle schools and high schools all across Southern California. And immediately, I knew a few things. I knew that I was going to make a film or a large project called The Tuba Thieves. And I knew that I wasn't going to make the film about the thieves, because everything that was being reported was speculation about the thieves and why this was happening. And what I kept imagining was students sitting in class with no instruments to play. And I kept just thinking about how this was sort of a really beautiful education, like an education of just listening. And also it struck me this, this parallel between what I had just been kind of experiencing with all of these collaborators, and then all of a sudden this necessary reconciliation between these band directors, the high school band students, also the school communities, of how they, financially and aurally are reconciling with this loss of this like really large instrument. So I started getting in touch with different band directors and sort of just started feeling out how this project was going to unfold. And I knew that what I wanted to do was reach out to a few different composers and ask them to respond to different references and make me a score before they knew what the film was about. So they knew the title of the film, and then I gave a series of references that were sort of, I guess, a little bit random, but they were things that were on my mind, and I wanted to see what these things sounded like. So I'm going to just show you a few of these things. So Steve Roden is one of the composers. He's also a painter, and I asked him to look at specifically the pattern that the Zamboni makes when it cleans away the snow on an ice skating rink. And then Christine Sun Kim is a deaf artist and composer, and I asked her to look at Louise Nevelson, the artist Louise Nevelson, look at her eyelashes, because they're like sculptures in and of themselves. And then Louisa Calder's dressing table, which is, Louisa Calder was Alexander Calder's wife, and she had all of this really amazing jewelry that he made her, which was just this like very physical, spatial body jewelry. And then also the eyeball sculptures of Louise Nevelson. So like the three Louises was just a very random reference I gave to Christine. And then I also gave a picture of the Maverick Concert Hall to Steve Roden. And all I knew about this building was that it was a concert hall and that it was in Woodstock, New York. And I had a picture of it. I thought it was really beautiful. And so I gave him that, which I have more to say about that later, but you can just look at that. And then I also found this quote from a physicist who wrote to the filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky after he saw his film The Mirror, and he tried to explain to Tarkovsky what his experience of watching The Mirror was. And I don't know how many of you have seen that film, but it's a really incredible way of experiencing a narrative, because it's very hard to connect the dots, but it's a biographical film. And the first time I actually saw it, I fell asleep many times. And so I felt like I had this very, like sleepy, wandering way of moving through it. And then one time I watched it in the middle of the day, totally alert the entire time. I had the exact same experience. It's like a very strange, dream-like film. And so I found this quote from a physicist who wrote this, and then I copied and pasted it to give to Christine Sun Kim to respond to. And when I copied it from a PDF, and when I pasted it, it did this like breaking apart concrete poetry thing. And then I just felt like the way that the quote became like a physical body that was like disintegrating and was sort of disabled was like just so much more describing its content in the quote than the original quote even did. So I started working with that. And I think what I'll do is show you a clip of an interview with the composer Christine Sun Kim, because she talks about this collaboration. So I'll show you that. So Christine, and actually I just gave you a small example of some of the references that I gave the composers, but there were a few more. Each of them got a few more, and I didn't mention that the third composer is Ethan Frederick Green, who also made the score for Night Sky. And so basically what happened was these composers made me these scores, and I just listened to them for 7 months. I didn't listen to anything else. I drove around, I walked around, I was like just completely living in this world of this music they made. And while I was listening to it, I also started exploring what I was hearing through, I was trying to separate my brain and my body experience, and both visually kind of imagine narrative and allow things to kind of play out in my mind, but then also I wanted to really explore this like bodily language that was extremely subjective, extremely intuitive. And so I started just making these different sculptures where I was either like playing with color relationships and trying to reply to hearing something that maybe was like synesthetically described in my mind as like a warm tone or like a specific taste that I would hear. I'm not synesthetic, so I'm not speaking about this scientifically at all. But and then basically trying to sort of replicate and start a conversation through the act of physically making sculpture that would then also inform the way that I was writing the script. And so I'm just going to go through some of these. I made a series of mobiles that loosely also tie back to this Alexander Calder reference, as well as this piece is actually called quasi-closed captions. And so Christine had responded to this idea of jewelry by making these field recordings of picking up jewelry on her sink. And so then I started responding with this jewelry chain. And that title, quasi-closed captions, refers to, because I hear, I lip read and I can hear, and I have hearing aids, and I hear well, but I always watch things with subtitles. And because I can hear, there are these moments where I see discrepancies that are taken in the subtitles that do not actually line up with what I'm seeing. And so those are quasi-closed captions. And I started thinking about that. I started thinking about my kind of frustration and cynicism about that. And then I saw it as this potential really beautiful language and metaphor for these like uncomfortable mixed experiences and these bad translations and these miscommunications. And I started to see those spaces as potentially very rich, somewhat, I guess, somewhat like almost hallucinogenic. Like I felt like there were these things that could emerge out of those spaces of disconnect, of missing connections that could open up like kind of a whole other way of writing a script in a way. So this is called I'm Not Going to Die, and that title comes directly from the script. So that's a line of dialogue that happens between two characters. This is called The Kaleidoscopic Window, which also comes from the script. There's a kaleidoscopic window that's in the film. This is called Ethan's Score. The one on the left is called The Golden Hour, and then the one on the right is called Tuba Heart. And then here's an image of an installation that I did of a bunch of these kind of like small component part sculptures. Yeah. I think what I'm gonna do now is I'll actually show you, okay, well first I wanna tell you that the narrative that I arrived at, just a description of sort of what the fictional part of the film is this story that is about a deaf drummer who, and it's a very quiet story about her relationship with her father and her partner, her boyfriend, who are both hearing, and they go and they see a lot of music. And the film also explores a kind of documentary-esque, it has a sort of documentary quality to it in that there's also these breaks to these different high schools around Los Angeles and them dealing with this loss of the tubas. And then also there are these sort of unexplained jumps back to different concerts throughout history that have a relationship between silence and music. And the deaf drummer character, her name is Nike, and she actually was in Night Sky. So her real name is Nike, her name's Nike Prince. And she was in the film, she was one of the dance marathon contestants. And I found out after we finished filming that she's a drummer. And so I found that out at the exact same moment as I was the thefts. And it was just like, I just kind of felt like I was sitting back and letting the film write itself. And this continues to happen. So there's like all sorts of these little details that I've started calling serendipitous glitches, which are these like, again, me just remaining kind of open to these strange like miscommunications and then sometimes beautiful communications. So I'm gonna play for you a scene that was specifically written to Christine's score that she made. And this is an excerpted version. It's actually a 12-minute scene, but this is about 8 minutes.
Residents of nearby buildings to evacuate. The Associated Press is warning that huge surges of water batter coastal areas, including in New York City, where it's feared the subway system will be flooded. In its noon advisory, the National Hurricane Center says Sandy will make landfall in the next few hours. The president and his Republican opponent formed
the occupant, which will manifest almost 10.
Président syrien Bachar al-Assad, ce tribunal international avait impliqué des figures du Hezbollah dans l'attentat.
So the way that I'm building this film is really slowly, and I'm thinking a lot of it about it a lot like a sort of an exquisite corpse game, or like a form of call and response. And so I'm trying to allow everything to just be continually influenced and shaped. So I made that scene, the script is finished, it gets tweaked a bit as I keep moving through, making scenes and then continuing to make sculptures. And so I, after finishing this scene, I continued making objects and I started revisiting some of the references that I gave the composers. And so I kept thinking about this Louise Nevelson's eyelashes thing. And there was this one sculpture there in the middle that when I Googled Louise Nevelson's eyelashes, I kept seeing that sculpture, and every time I saw it, I thought that it really looked a lot like soundproofing foam. And then my second thought was I would also really love to see that as a quilt, because it looked to me like a quilt. And I was thinking about both of these like sound absorbers. And so I just recently did a show, it's up right now, that's in France. And I made these two pieces as out of soundproofing foam and then as a quilt. And so this quilt is, it's completely non-functional in a traditional sense. It actually does work as a sound absorber. And it's 10 feet by 16 feet. They're the same size as Louise Nevelson's pieces. And so this is the one that I made out of soundproofing foam. And then I think I have a detail here. And then there's just the quilt, and you can see it in scale. And so I'm continuing to explore sculpturally these reference points, and trying to build kind of a larger conversation that is constantly being influenced by all of the details and how people are interpreting them. So I am going to do the 433, but I want to actually go back to this image of this, the concert hall. So this, yeah, there we go. So this is the Maverick Concert Hall, and I gave a picture of this to Steve Roden, and I remember sending him the email, and I got an email back from him like 1 minute later, and he was like, you know what that concert hall is, right? And I didn't really know what he was talking about, and he said, well, John Cage premiered 433 there in 1952. And so 433 is the really famous avant-garde piece that John Cage did, where David Tudor, the pianist, sat at a piano for 4 minutes and 33 seconds and played nothing. He just lifted the lid and closed the lid and kept a stopwatch going. And so Steve thought this was pretty incredible that I had no idea, and was simultaneously making all of this work with people whose relationship to sound was already really nuanced and specific. And at first I was like, I can't redo 433, like that's just so obvious. And then I was like, I have to redo 433. So, or not redo it, but make it. So we did, that became a part of the script. And then at the same time, I also, somebody else told me this story about a 1979 concert that happened in San Francisco at a deaf social club. And we're actually 9 months of programming of West Coast punk shows that happened at this deaf social club. And so the story is that the band manager for the Offs, this like not very well known, if you're not like a punk historian, West Coast punk band, he saw the deaf club on a marquee and thought, oh, that's a cool name for a club, and went inside and then was like, oh no, actually everybody here is deaf. And then he was like, wait, that's perfect. And so he wrote on a napkin, can we do a punk show here? And they said, give us some money for beer. And he said, okay. And so he organized this punk show, and the novelty of it just like spread in San Francisco, and everybody loved it. And so there were these 9 months of programming, and the programming actually stopped because the neighbors complained of the noise, which is beautiful. And the artist Bruce Connor a lot of the famous photographs of West Coast punk from that era are taken by the artist Bruce Conner, and he hosted the last show there. So we did a reenactment of 433 in 1952, and then a reenactment of this 1979 punk show, and I'm going to play them back to back. The 433 is, I'm going to just show a 5-minute clip, and then I'll show you the whole version of the Def Club. And both of these I've organized as, or I've edited them specifically for installations. So they are 2-channel videos, and eventually when I make all of the Tuba Thieves, it'll get re-edited. So everything kind of exists as its own component part right now.
fight crime, be people. Dead Kennedys. Yeah, Tuxedo Moon. But okay, listen, the neighbors are through. They're through with the noise, they're through with the beer, and they're through with you weirdos. I'm talking about all you weirdos. All right, I'm not done. I want to thank the Duff Club for having you weirdos. I want to thank Hanrahan. Is he here? Hanrahan? He left. He's off. Okay, and then we have to thank Bruce Connor. It was his art grant that got us all in this room. Bruce, come up and take a bow. Bruce.
Thank you. Beep, beep, wolf, as they say, the floor might cave in at any minute. The next band is Tuxedo Moon.
Check. Sounds good to me. All right. Fucking good.
Okay, I'm going to show you one more video, and then I'll open it to a Q&A. And so this is a scene of that I've been developing with the high school students.
Hey, nobody's connected to Mickey. Nobody's next to him. Yeah, I'm gonna film it right now. Hey, go focus. Hey, me, my girl. It's me, my girl. Oh, no.
No, I didn't. Okay, that's all she had though. That's all I had. Her butt is the only one at the side. Everybody else left. Mine's to the side. Hey, are you ready? Captain Hudson! One, two, three, up!
Tackle by 34, Stephen Ortiz. Hand off to Thompson. Gales keeps it, tucks it and runs, breaks the tackle. Andrew Harvey there to make a tackle. Injured player on the field. About a 9-yard gain on the play.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you paying attention. Thanks.